Hello YouTube, welcome to Nutkin Farm. I say welcome rather than welcome back because I suspect some of you finding this video by Google might be finding me in unhappy circumstances, which we'll get to in a minute. But by way of introduction, my name's Daniel. Most of the time I'm a barrister, but like a few other barristers, we like our antidotes to the law, and in my case it's a macadamia farm here in Rosebank in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. Now, the trees you're looking at now weren't planted by me, but over in this direction are some trees that I did plant, and I'm sort of excited this spring in 2023 because I planted these trees about 2 and a bit years ago. It's a particular new variety called MCT1, which is renowned for cropping within a couple of years, and you can see flowers there that may well turn into nuts for me this particular season. Most of the trees are growing nice and strong, and I'm happy about that, and I do look forward to tasting my first nut from these trees. But unfortunately, it's not all good news. You can see here that a tree that was the same height as these other trees has been snapped off at the base, just completely snapped over. There are other trees here further up the block where limbs have been brushed off low down. A couple of trees are trying to grow back, but because they've been knocked over at the graft, the trees won't be sort of true to the variety. And yeah, I'm particularly sad about this one because this branch that was knocked over had a whole bunch of flowers on that could have been nuts for me. And you don't have to look far to find the culprit. There's their calling card. Roving cattle. And look, it's always been an issue for me here at Nutkin Farm. I've had a particular neighbour whose cattle tend to roam, and it always tends to be in the dry periods when the pasture is running low on the cattle farms, but there's always plenty of pasture available on neighbouring macadamia farms because obviously we mow, we don't have livestock in the paddocks, and you know, if a cow ever gets out of a cattle farm and onto a macadamia farm, it usually thinks it's in heaven and keeps wanting to come back. And that has been, like I said, a big issue. Now, until 2023, there was no real legal recourse that you could even threaten a neighbouring farmer with, because the only way to go ahead, and councils wouldn't get involved because they didn't have the resources, the only way to go ahead was to impound the cattle yourself, give the farmer a certain period of notice saying, if you don't come and collect the cows, I'm going to go in, put them in the local sales yards, and you'll have to go down and get them yourself and pay a fee. And you have to treat the cows, you have to feed the cows while they're in your impounding, and you have to pay for them to be transported. So in order for the victim to do anything, the victim had to go to all this expense, and that's assuming you know how to impound cattle in the first place, or that you've even got somewhere that you could impound cattle, and most macadamia farmers wouldn't know the first thing about what to do, and they don't have a cattle crush or the equipment needed to sort of round up cattle, don't even have a trusty cattle dog. So in reality, it was impossible to stop cattle farmers doing the wrong thing and either accidentally or on purpose letting their cows out to forage on their neighbours' farms. And certainly what I tried to do is, you know, you try and reason with your neighbour as much as you can, but if that doesn't work and it just keeps happening despite whatever promises or whatever that you've been made, you do need to take it to that next step. Funnily enough, there is now a next step that you can take, but it was hidden in a bit of legislation passed by the previous New South Wales government called the Public Spaces Unattended Property Act. Now, you might wonder, with a name like that, what's that got to do with roving cattle? And the answer is, it actually does, because buried at section 40 of that act is a new offence of animal trespass. And that is, it's an offence for a person to allow their animal to trespass on another person's private land without their consent. Okay, so i.e. classic trespass, except for animals. That got introduced in that legislation. It was law in 2021, but there was a period of grace, and it didn't come into force until May 2023. And at that point, you know, I was sick of having cattle do this sort of thing to my farm that you see here. And I said, look, there's this new law in force. It does involve trespass, and you will be heavily penalised if you don't get your cows off. And I think got my threats ignored, or thumbed the nose, or goodness knows what. But anyway, the cattle kept coming. In the end, I said, right, well, I've given fair warning, I'm going to do this. So I rang Lismore Police. They scratched their heads. They said, we haven't seen this before. We didn't know this law existed. They then put it in the too hard basket, which is otherwise called the Rural Crimes Unit in Casino. They hadn't seen the law either. They'd been used to dividing fences disputes between farmers and try to sort those out, but they hadn't seen an offence of animal trespass before. So this law had managed to evade everyone's perception, and it turned out I was the first person in the history of this act to actually use the offence. So the police officer concerned, and I won't name him, decided to start off softly, and try and reason with the offending farmer himself. Visited my farm, saw some evidence, visited his farm, looked at his fences, that sort of thing, and said to the farmer, you've got to stop these animals trespassing. I'm going to give you a warning. So the way the law works here is pretty much the way a speeding ticket might work. You know, the cop doesn't have to issue you with an infringement. He could give you a warning if the police officer, in their discretion, thinks that might correct the behaviour without actually going to penalties. And so I went along with that. But yeah, eventually, when it just kept happening, and the farmer, you know, told the police officer, I think, whatever he wanted to hear, but then just kept on doing the same thing and letting the cattle roam. At that point, the police officer considered that there was a case for putting a stiff fine on the farmer, and that's what happened. Now, in terms of the fine, we measure fines in New South Wales by penalty units, and as at 2023, each penalty unit is $110. So for the first animal, it's 25 penalty units, or $2,750. And it's then 5 more penalty units, or $550 for every animal after that, up to a maximum of $5,000. So pretty hefty penalties. Now, there's very few other remedies available, but certainly the police officer can't make a farmer sell their cattle, fence them in any better, or anything like that. It's really just a matter of issuing fines so that doing the wrong thing becomes more expensive than doing the right thing. And in my particular case, after the stiff fine was issued, the farmer decided to bite the bullet and sell the offending cattle. And I'm not a cattle expert, but I do hear that, you know, once a cow has learned the reward mechanism of, if I push through this fence, I find really nice food on the other side, they'll just keep doing it, and there's not too much even fences with barbed wire can do to deter the cow from taking that action. They call it turning bad, even though really it's not the cow's fault at all. And yeah, like I said, in dry times, you see it a lot more than in wet times. And so, you know, it's not just fencing that's the issue here, it's feeding. So that was a happy ending. And the last, yesterday, just before making this video, a truck carrying 20 head of roving cattle left for somewhere. Frankly, I don't care where, so long as it's somewhere else. And the cows are going to be sold, and hopefully my problems are over. So this video, I suppose, is for a little bit of a how-to if you are experiencing the same issue yourself. And I hope you're not, but if you have reached that point where you've spoken to your neighbour, and do this, speak to them informally. Don't just say your cows are trespassing or something like that. Explain to them why it's a bad thing. They're destroying my trees. One of my other neighbours has lost $8,000 of macadamia crop because the cows have fouled it up with their poop, and it's breaching their supply contract to supply macadamias with feces on them. So you need to explain, look, you can't just make a living off my land and be a detriment to my living. It's not the right thing. Far better to use that reasonable approach than just say your animals are trespassing because I say so. But if the reasoning approach doesn't work, you need to start putting that communication in a more formal way. Now, it could be text messages that you save, it could be emails, it could even be a letter saying, I've raised this with you on this occasion, your animals are still trespassing. If you don't stop it, I'm going to have to take further action. You might have to repeat that process once or twice just to make sure that that message is received, and you might even have to do it a couple of different ways, such as text and email. But you need to save evidence of that. If that still doesn't work, and if the offender is still doing the wrong thing, you can then move to that next stage of lodging a police report. You can't do this particular one online. You actually have to ring the police and lodge a report, get an event number, and start that running. Now, you need more than your own say-so as to the offence of trespass. You need evidence. Photographic evidence is the most obvious way of doing it. You could take a big photo of a cow poop like this, but it doesn't necessarily prove that it's farmer X's cattle on Y block of land. What you really need to do, if possible, is to take photographs of the offending animals on your land, preferably next to somewhere that's identifiable. So if they're near your house, get your phone out, take a video, go from a pan of your house, pan across to the cattle, so that that piece of video clearly shows the offending cows on your land. And then the rest of the offence that you have to prove, which is it's without your consent, well, then, your emails and texts and that sort of stuff clearly go to the fact that you didn't consent for those animals to be on your land. And then that's the offence proven. You do, like I said, need to be prepared for the police to try and go softly at first. They don't like issues between neighbours, and it's certainly not a good idea generally to go to the law against your neighbour like this if things can be sorted any other way. But if a warning is given to the offender and the behaviour keeps persisting, that is when you go back to the police officer with a second round of evidence, photographic or otherwise. If you've got a camera that puts date stamps on, so much the better. But basically you have to provide further evidence that cattle are still trespassing despite the warning being given. And then, as it was with my case, there really isn't anywhere for the police to go except to issue a stiff fine to the offender. Now, the law isn't well known. It's a good idea to tell the offending farmer that you're going to use that law against them, so that there's no excuse of ignorance or I didn't know or all those sorts of excuses which the law doesn't really look at overly favourably. But if you get your ducks in a row, you can use this law, and it is highly effective at making doing the right thing cheaper than doing the wrong thing. And, we all suffer in a drought, but if you've got neighbouring cattle on your property and they're causing damage, you no longer have to put up with it. And I hope this guide is a little bit of assistance to those of you tearing your hair out, wondering what you can do, and not previously having been aware of the new law that's been enforced since May 2023. Thanks for watching, everyone. If this is the only video from Nutkin Farm that you watch, I'm privileged to have had you here. Otherwise, if you want to like and subscribe, that's entirely a matter for you. I'm going to get on with more pleasant things. Hope you found this useful, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.